The coffee cup trembled slightly in Mara's hand as she stood beside the cracked vinyl booth. Forcing a polite smile she no longer felt because Derek Morrison was staring at her the way hunters stare at wounded prey. Not rushed, not angry, but entertained. And that was what made him dangerous. Ruby's roadside diner hummed with low conversations and clinking plates, yet somehow the space around Derek felt silent, heavy, as if everyone sensed trouble but chose to look away. "I've been waiting 20 minutes, he said loudly, leaning back, spreading his arms as if he owned the place. "Or are you too busy flirting to do your job?" Mara swallowed, nodding, apologizing, even though she had checked on his order 3 times already, because experience had taught her that dignity was expensive and silence was cheaper. She had been a waitress for years, had survived rude customers and long nights, but Derek was different. He didn't just insult her, he enjoyed watching her endure it. When she set the plate down, his hand shot out and closed around her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, just firm enough to remind her that he could, and the diner froze as if the air itself had stopped breathing. "Smile more," he whispered, his thumb pressing against her pulse. "People like you should be grateful for attention." Heat burned behind Mara's eyes, but she did not cry. She never cried in front of men like him. He released her after a long, humiliating pause, laughing as though it were a joke while the manager pretended not to see and the other customers pretended not to care. Moments later, a glass of water tipped over near his table, spilling into his lap, though Mara hadn't touched it, and Derek exploded, shouting, accusing her of sabotage, forcing her to kneel and clean the mess as he stood over her, whispering words meant to wound deeper than any bruise. When he finally left, he turned at the door and smiled, promising with his eyes that this wasn't over, and the bell chimed behind him like a warning. Near midnight, Mara tied off her apron with shaking fingers and stepped into the cold parking lot. Her keys clenched between her knuckles the way her husband had taught her, though she'd once teased him for worrying too much. She was almost at her car when a door slammed and Derek appeared from the shadows, blocking her path with practiced ease, his voice low, accusing her of getting him reported, mocking her marriage, repeating her husband's name slowly as if tasting it. Fear crawled up her spine, but she stood her ground, asking only to go home. And for a moment something dark flickered in Derek's eyes before headlights swept across the lot and he retreated, pretending politeness, memorizing her license plate before driving away. The apartment was dim and quiet when Mara finally arrived, but her husband, Alaric, was awake, sitting by the window, too still, too calm, his sharp features unreadable as he looked up and said softly that someone had touched her. And in that moment Mara realized the night had only just begun, because the man she loved was not merely protective, and the bully who harassed a waitress had no idea whose patience he had tested. Mara sat on the edge of the couch with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor as if the cracked tiles could swallow her fear, while Alaric stood a few steps away, listening in absolute silence, the kind of silence that felt heavier than shouting. And when she finished telling him everything, the insults, the grabbed wrist, the parking lot encounter, he did not speak right away, which frightened her more than anger ever could. He walked to the window instead, pulling the curtain back just enough to look out into the night, his posture perfectly still, his breathing slow, controlled, almost unnatural, and Mara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold outside. "Did he hurt you?" Alaric asked at last, his voice calm, too calm, and she shook her head quickly, saying no, insisting she was fine, because she loved him and she knew there were parts of him that surfaced only when he felt threatened. Alaric turned to her then, kneeling in front of her so their eyes were level, his dark gaze softening as he brushed his thumb gently over her wrist, right where Derek's fingers had been, and for a brief second his eyes caught the light wrong, reflecting like polished stone, before he blinked and the moment passed. "You did nothing wrong," he said quietly, and those words alone nearly broke her, because no one had said them to her all night. Mara leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady strength beneath his calm exterior, unaware that outside the apartment walls, the night itself seemed to be listening. Later, after Mara finally fell into an uneasy sleep, Alaric stood alone in the kitchen, staring at his reflection in the darkened window, his jaw tight, memories stirring of ancient laws and broken men who believed power made them untouchable. And somewhere deep inside him, the king stirred. Across town, Derek Morrison sat in his car outside a convenience store, replaying the evening with irritation, anger twisting into obsession, because he hated the way Mara had looked at him in the parking lot, not afraid enough, not grateful enough, and he told himself that tomorrow he would remind her who held control. The next evening, when Mara returned to work, the air in the diner felt wrong, tense, as if something invisible had shifted overnight, and when Derek walked in right on schedule, his confident grin faltered for just a moment as his eyes landed on a tall man seated quietly at the counter. Dressed in dark clothes, his presence commanding without effort. Alaric did not look at Derek directly, not at first, but when he did, it was brief and measured, a single glance that made Derek's stomach tighten for reasons he could not explain. Mara felt it too, the subtle change. The way the lights seemed dimmer, the sounds duller, and when Alaric finally turned on his stool to face Derek fully, his voice carried softly across the diner, polite and controlled, asking if there was a problem with the service, and Derek laughed it off, unaware that something ancient had just marked him. As Mara watched her husband and her tormentor share that moment of quiet eye contact, she sensed that lines had been crossed, that protection had been silently promised, and that the fragile balance holding her ordinary life together was beginning to crack. Because Alaric had seen the man who hurt her, and kings, even hidden ones. Never forget, Derek tried to convince himself that the man at the counter was nothing, just another customer with an intimidating posture, but the feeling in his chest would not ease. Because there was something about the stranger's stillness that felt wrong, like a storm waiting behind calm skies. And when Alaric finally stood, the diner seemed to shrink around him. He walked toward Derek's booth with unhurried steps, his expression neutral, almost polite, yet every instinct Derek had told him to stay seated, to not provoke whatever stood before him. "My wife mentioned there was an issue," Alaric said softly, his voice even, controlled, carrying no accusation, and that somehow made it worse. Derek scoffed, forcing a laugh, waving a dismissive hand as if brushing away smoke, saying it was all a misunderstanding, just a joke taken too seriously. But his eyes kept darting toward Mara, who stood frozen near the counter, her heart pounding as she watched her husband's shoulders straighten in a way she recognized only from rare moments when he became someone else. Alaric tilted his head slightly, studying Derek with unsettling focus. And for a brief second, Derek felt exposed, as if his thoughts were laid bare, every cruel impulse, every abuse of power pulled into the light. "You touched her," Alaric said quietly. Not a question, and Derek's smile faltered, irritation flashing into anger as he leaned forward, muttering that no one tells him how to behave, least of all some foreign nobody hiding behind manners. That was when the lights flickered, just once, so subtle most patrons missed it. But Derek felt the temperature drop, felt his breath catch as Alaric's eyes darkened, reflecting something red and ancient beneath the surface. The world seemed to slow, the clatter of dishes fading into a distant echo, and Derek suddenly understood fear, real fear, the kind that crawls into your bones and whispers that you have made a terrible mistake. Alaric leaned closer, his voice barely audible now, yet impossibly clear, telling Derek that there were rules in this world older than laws, older than men like him, and one of them was never to harm what belonged to a king. Derek laughed again, louder this time, mocking the words, calling him crazy, but the sound rang hollow even to his own ears because his hands were trembling and he could not stop them. Mara took a step forward, whispering Alaric's name, grounding him, reminding him where he was. And slowly, with visible effort, Alaric stepped back, the pressure lifting just enough for the diner to breathe again. "Finish your meal," he said calmly, "and leave. Do not speak to my wife again." Derek slammed some cash on the table and stood, muttering threats about connections and consequences, but as he brushed past Alaric, his shoulder collided with something solid as stone, and pain shot up his arm. leaving him gasping, humiliated, shaken. He left the diner in a fury, unaware that his fate had already been sealed, while Mara stared at her husband, questions burning in her chest, because she had seen something impossible in his eyes, something powerful and dangerous and protective all at once. When the door closed behind Derek, Alaric turned back to Mara, his expression gentle again, asking softly if she was all right, and she nodded, though she knew nothing would ever be simple again. Because the man she loved was no ordinary husband, and the bully who thought himself untouchable had just crossed paths with something ancient, patient, and unforgiving. That night, sleep refused to come to Mara, because every time she closed her eyes she saw the flicker in Alaric's gaze. The way the diner lights had dimmed, the way Derek's confidence had cracked so suddenly, and when dawn finally broke, she realized that the life she thought she understood was quietly unraveling. Over breakfast, she asked Alaric the question she had been holding back since the night before, asking him what Derek meant when he laughed about rules and kings. And for a long moment, Alaric said nothing, simply watching the steam rise from his untouched coffee as if deciding how much truth she was ready to carry. He told her only that there were people in the world who believed power made them immune to consequences, and that he had spent a very long time correcting that belief. His words careful, restrained, yet weighted with centuries of experience he did not explain. At work later that day, Mara noticed small changes that unsettled her more than open danger ever had. Derek did not appear, but strangers lingered too long outside the diner, men in dark coats who never ordered food, whose eyes followed her movements with quiet interest, and when she mentioned it to Carlos, he brushed it off, saying it was probably nothing, though his voice lacked conviction. That evening, Alaric arrived early to walk her home, his presence steady and reassuring, but when they turned down the side street toward their apartment, a black SUV rolled slowly past them, its tinted windows hiding whoever watched from inside, and Alaric's hand tightened around Mara's just enough for her to feel it. He told her softly that some men did not accept humiliation easily, that Derek was not as ordinary as he pretended to be, and that cruelty often traveled in packs, seeking justification for its own violence. When Mara asked what that meant, Alaric stopped beneath a flickering street lamp and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Not fear, but resolve. And he told her that Derek was connected to a group that hunted what it did not understand, men who sensed power and mistook it for threat, men who believed monsters should be destroyed without ever asking who the real monsters were. The truth settled heavily between them, and Mara realized the danger was no longer abstract. It was close, deliberate, watching and waiting. Later that night, as Mara slept, Alaric stood by the window again, his reflection no longer human in the glass, his eyes glowing faintly as he listened beyond the limits of ordinary hearing, catching whispered conversations, engines idling too long, intentions sharpening like blades. Memories surfaced of old wars, of humans who feared the dark and called it evil, of kings who ruled from shadows to protect those who could not protect themselves. And for the first time in centuries, Alaric felt that old balance shifting. The next morning, Derek's name appeared on the diner's incident log, filed by an anonymous report detailing harassment, threats, and stalking, and while management claimed it was coincidence, Mara knew better when she saw Derek later that day standing across the street, his expression no longer mocking but calculating, his eyes filled with a dangerous curiosity. When their gazes met, he smiled slowly, not the smile of a bully enjoying power, but of a man who believed he had found something worth hunting. And as Mara turned away, her heart racing, she understood that kindness had placed her at the center of a hidden war, and that the man she loved was preparing to step fully into a role he had long tried to leave behind. The danger stopped being subtle the night the power went out across their block, plunging the street into unnatural darkness that felt thicker than shadow. And Mara knew instantly this was not an accident because the silence pressed in around them, swallowing the distant sounds of traffic and wind as if the world itself were holding its breath. Alaric was on his feet in seconds, pulling Mara behind him, his body tense, alert, his calm finally cracking to reveal the predator beneath, and before she could ask what was happening, the front door splintered inward with a violent crash. Men flooded the apartment. armed with strange weapons etched in symbols that made Mara's skin prickle, their faces tight with fear disguised as hatred, and at their center stood Derek, no longer smug but desperate, shouting that Alaric was a monster, and that monsters had to be put down before they destroyed everything. Alaric moved with blinding speed, disarming two men before Mara could even scream. But when the weapons flared to life, burning with a light that hurt her eyes, he staggered, a sharp sound tearing from his throat as he fell to one knee, and Mara felt her heart seize because she had never seen him hurt, not once. Panic surged through her, raw and overwhelming, and without thinking she ran to him, kneeling at his side as Derek laughed, shouting that ancient traps worked even on kings, that blood made all creatures equal in the end. As Mara cradled Alaric's head against her chest, tears spilling freely now, something deep inside her broke open, a memory that was not a memory, a knowledge that did not feel learned but remembered, and words rose to her lips in a language she had never spoken before, old and melodic, heavy with power. The room seemed to shudder as she spoke, the symbols on the weapons flickering, then cracking, the men recoiling in terror as if struck by an unseen force. And Derek's laughter died instantly, replaced by disbelief as he stared at her. Alaric looked up at Mara in shock, his pain fading as the ancient words wrapped around him like a shield, his eyes widening not with fear, but recognition, because he knew that language knew it from a time before kingdoms fell, before treaties were broken, before he had sworn never to claim a queen. The weapons failed completely, dropping uselessly to the floor, and the men fled in chaos, dragging Derek with them as he screamed that this wasn't possible, that she was just a waitress, just a human. But the truth had already been spoken into the world and could not be taken back. When the apartment finally fell silent again, Alaric rose slowly, reverently, cupping Mara's face with trembling hands as he asked her where she had learned the royal tongue. And she shook her head, just as shaken as he was, whispering that she didn't know, that it had simply felt right, as if her soul had remembered something her mind had forgotten. Alaric pressed his forehead to hers, awe and devotion mixing in his expression, and told her in a voice thick with emotion that ancient blood recognized ancient bonds, that some souls were born human but destined for crowns, and as sirens wailed. Faintly in the distance, Mara realized her kindness had not only saved her husband's life, it had revealed who she truly was, and there would be no turning back now. The world did not end with fire or blood the way Mara had feared. Instead, justice arrived quietly, deliberately, the way kings preferred it, and within days, Derek Morrison's life began to unravel in ways no lawyer or connection could stop. Complaints surfaced from places he had long bullied in silence. Former co-workers, service staff, even neighbors finding courage they never knew they had. And every lie Derek tried to tell collapsed under evidence that seemed to appear from nowhere. The men who had followed him vanished, abandoning him the moment fear outweighed loyalty. And when Derek finally stood alone in a cold interrogation room, he felt something watching him, unseen but undeniable, reminding him that some crimes echo beyond human courts. Alaric did not appear to him in shadows or violence. Instead, Derek was left to live, stripped of power, reputation, and safety, forced to experience the same helplessness he had enjoyed inflicting on others. Because true punishment was understanding what it meant to be small. Meanwhile, Mara's life transformed not through wealth or sudden fame, but through dignity finally respected. As the diner changed ownership, her manager removed, and an apology issued that felt sincere for the first time. At home, Alaric told her the full truth at last, speaking of ancient houses, hidden thrones, and a world balanced between secrecy and survival, explaining that she was not a mistake or an accident but a bridge, a soul-born human yet carrying the echo of a royal lineage long thought lost. He told her he had fallen in love with her kindness long before fate revealed her strength, that he would have chosen her even if she had remained only Mara, the quiet waitress with tired eyes and endless compassion. Mara listened, overwhelmed yet calm, realizing that her power had never come from blood or destiny, but from the courage to stand up for herself and others when it mattered most. when Alaric knelt before her not as a king claiming a queen, but as a husband honoring his equal, she understood that love was the truest crown of all. Together they chose a different future, one where power served protection, where justice was patient but certain, and where no one was judged by their station or appearance again. The city never knew why certain predators disappeared or why kindness seemed safer afterward, but those who felt the change carried it forward quietly, paying respect where once there had been cruelty. And in the end, the story was not about a bully being punished or a vampire king revealing himself, but about a woman who survived humiliation without losing her humanity, and a king who remembered why he ruled in the first place. Because true power is not found in fear, but in protecting those who are treated as invisible, and once that truth is seen, it can never be unseen.